Today's edition of MacVoices is supported by MacVoices Magazine, our free Flipboard magazine that brings you some of the best Mac, iPhone, and iPad productivity tips on the web. High in signal, low in noise, just like MacVoices, MacVoices Magazine includes information on how you can get more out of your Apple technology. Subscribe at macvoices.com/magazine or search for MacVoices Magazine on Flipboard. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, a couple shows ago, we played catch-up with Joe Kissel and a number of Take Control titles that he's updated. Somehow that's become a theme here because this time we're getting to play catch-up with another Take Control author who we know and love, but we just haven't been able to put our schedules together. This time we get to talk to Glenn Fleishman about a number of his recent books. Glenn, it's great to have you back. Welcome.
It's terrific to be back here, and I've been a little busy writing books. Apparently,
well, listen, I never mind that because sooner or later I will pin you down and we will get to talk about them.
It is true. Thank you for that too.
Yes. So the three books we're going to talk about in this order, hopefully, unless we change it in the middle. Take control of Slack. Take control of your Apple ID. And take control of Wi-Fi networking and security. And I'm really anxious to talk about really all of these books because you take a very technical approach most of the time to these things, and yet you meld it so well with the style of approachability. So let's talk about Slack, because Slack is something that I have watched develop in the business world so much and become so important. And then Microsoft, of course, did what Microsoft does, and suddenly they came out with Teams, and that changes things a little bit. But it felt to me, at least, like Slack was the start of something new when it first came out. Is that an accurate perception?
Yeah, it feels like there are people were waiting for Slack to happen. Where there's a lot of products that appear, and either you don't know why they came out, or companies have to build a market for it. And the story of Slack is actually kind of funny. It was actually a side project. It was an internal communication tool built by the developers of a game called Glitch. And it was a multiplayer online game that was actually a very, calm, relaxing game. And you kind of had to feed chickens and things. It was a very pretty game. And they could not get an audience for it, but they had very supportive backers, people in the venture capital world who said, look, let's figure out what we can do. You have a great team. You build products really well. What's the thing that makes the most sense? They said, we really like this internal communication system we built. We're like, great. Why don't you think about building that into a product? Maybe something will come of it. And now it's valued at billions of dollars. But I think it actually shows that it wasn't. It's a little bit how Twitter came out of a podcasting app, and some really great products. Well, people have different opinions about Twitter, but some really great products come out of a lack of specific intentionality. It arises out of a side need, and as a result, it winds up taking on a disproportionate importance because they scratched an itch, and it's the same itch as other people have. So I do have that feeling that Slack came from literally it did not exist. It wasn't like it was a program that or a system that did one kind of thing and they expanded, and there were systems like Atlassian's HipChat had already existed. There were other group online messaging tools that were designed primarily for companies, but Slack, there was something about it. I think kind of the ease of use, the friendliness of it. They focused on a very few specific features, and they weren't necessarily like a business. I mean, they wanted to sell to businesses, but their initial version was just, I think it was so easy to sort of slide into, especially in the web version, that there was such a low barrier of entry, and they had such high functionality in their free flavor that people were like, well, I'll try this thing out. And then it just spread like wildfire.
And I agree with everything you said, but I will say this. The first time I fired up Slack, I didn't quite know what to do next because it was a whole different metaphor for communicating. I mean, we all know what chat apps look like, and we know what file sharing apps look like. And, I'd been part of some Basecamp groups and different things, but this just felt a little bit different, but you kind of also had to be guided just a little to get started.
Yeah, I think there's a group of people for whom Slack felt like slipping on a glove, and there's others for whom it felt like being knocked upside the head. And I have to admit, I was actually a little in the knocked upside the head part myself when I'd been using HipChat with one publication I work with, and I found it kind of, I don't know, it was always a little kind of quirky. It was fine. It wasn't, I didn't like using it. It was just a tool. And then suddenly it's like, okay, we're all using Slack. Like everything suddenly, some companies are like, well, we're going to try using Slack. And then within a week, they're like, okay, we're just using Slack forever. There wasn't even this like, and I think literally in one case, we're doing a 30-day trial of whether we shift over. And within days, it was like, all right, we are just, just turn off your old client. We're done. But I felt like there were a lot of mysteries about it because I'd never been a big IRC, internet relay chat, or that's what it's called for, right? Relay, I think. I don't remember why it's. Oh yeah, because you're sending it through all the old machines. Of course, it was a literal relay, and that was a little more like the Slack was based on. So if you came from that world, maybe. I mean, BBSs were a little like this in the old days, and IRC was like it, and has a little bit of the feel of like Usenet groups. Is like everything in Slack is about a channel, and they talk about it as conversations. So there are public channels that everyone who's a member of a given Slack workspace, which is what they call their groups, can participate in, and then there are these private channels that only people who are invited to know they even exist. So you can have conversation that is not globally searchable in the group. And then there's direct messaging, which is just like instant messaging with, two or more people involved. And this conversational approach, I think, in other kinds of collaborative tools, there's often like a wiki approach. There's like, all right, here's the document we work on together. There might be a simultaneous document editing thing. Here's our file central control. And then chat was off to the side, or you'd start a chat for a specific thing, or it'd be deeply threaded. It'd be like forums where you posted to it. It wasn't live. And Slack's whole focus is on live interaction and communication in these distinct conversations. And I think that is what, for some people, you're kind of looking, well, you're like, where's the center of Slack? It's like there is no center. There's a general channel is the closest thing to it. But because everything is in conversations, all the features you need, like when you're looking for files, you're looking for how to collaboratively edit a file, like create a document in Slack. All these things are kind of to the side, so you have to know how to bring them in and use them within a conversation.
Okay, so we don't want to give a tutorial on Slack here. It's tempting to, but we don't want to do that. But I think there's still a lot of folks out there that have not adopted this metaphor or are not even familiar with it. So who is Slack for at this point? I mean, is it for families? Is it for small businesses, large businesses, teams within businesses? Where do you see it fitting for the folks who have not adopted it yet and can't quite figure it out?
That's a great question. I think there's one other constituency there too, is all those plus people who are told you have to use it, which is, I think, a fairly big. I'm sure this happened to you. I'm in 4 active groups now, and some willingly, and some because I'm part of a publication. It's what they do. So it's not like I don't want to be there, but it's just like, all right, this is how we communicate. Among the people contributing, freelancers and full-time staffers. I think Slack works for situations in which discussions, mostly informal discussions among multiple people around specific topics, often ongoing long-term topics, help move things forward. So not every company works that way. Some are very hierarchical, and some are very in-person consensus. So they want to get everybody on like a Zoom call or a group, Skype or whatever, because you all look face-to-face and you do something and it's synchronous. So Slack is synchronous in the sense that you can type back and forth in real time, but it's also asynchronous, and you can go back and look at conversations or respond to someone hours later. I think that makes it a little different because most tools are either a little bit like, whenever you get to it back and forth, like Facebook posting, say, or it's a live conversation. But I think there's a lot of cases in which you're like, you have ongoing conversation about things that are happening sometimes continuously because you're actively monitoring something, but also because that's kind of how you drive the thing forward, and you have people on different devices at different times. So like a great example is, and I use this all the time, is like kids sports teams. A bunch of parents, and maybe sometimes the kids, who have no other connection necessarily, they could use email, and we know how terrible email is for like follow-up and clogging and being ignored, right? Email has its own priority system, and ignoring email is like the dominant priority for a lot of people. So, and it's also hard to archive. And if you forget to CC everybody or reply all, the thread is lost, or you can't find someone's email address. We're going to simultaneously cough here. So the joy of Slack, I think, is you center everything in the same place. So it's like, all right, there's 15 kids. We're trying to get them all together. All the parents and sometimes all the kids can be in this and say, okay, who's bringing snack? You figure it out. When you forget, you just scroll back and you see, or you create a channel that's like next week's game. And there's a channel for every game that's coming up. And so only the people participating in that in a sports league could be in that channel, or the team. There's a lot of ways to segregate and make discussions distinct that you can then refer back to. I think this works for businesses in particular. You often have different departments, but even small businesses, you want to have a history that is not stuck in email. I mean, Slack has kind of marketed itself at some ways as like it's a replacement for a lot of email, in which email is the worst way to do something, but we've only had email before now. So you don't want to post it to a website inside the company. You don't want to make a wiki entry. You don't want to, create a Google Doc. What you want to do is go back and forth with people, discuss something, come up with an answer or answer questions, and then later you want to be able to go back and find that answer or find the discussion. Nothing except like collaborative group discussion is good about going back to find it. So like all these other modalities, I mean, especially email. Like I think about there's so many things in which I was in group emails before, and we spent so much time trying to remember what we'd agreed on. And Slack becomes the truth of what we all agreed on.
I'm so glad you brought up the email thing, because that's what was running through my mind, that what you were describing sounds suspiciously like the way some people use email, not everybody, that are almost an instantaneous kind of thing. I mean, how many times have you gotten an email or didn't respond to something, and somebody picks up the phone and says, "Hey, did you get my email?" Which just completely defeats the purpose. But you're right. It feels like that same kind of potential interaction, but without the hassles of the threads and different email clients doing different kind of threads. And after
and
a
the
while,
replies, like 15 levels of replies, and you can't even follow the email. And then somebody's email bounces, or someone accidentally deletes the email. Like, this is the thing is Slack is a live archive of conversation. As the instant you post a message, it's archived, and you can delete messages, your own messages, and administrators can delete messages. But I think that the critical aspect is that for most people in most situations, you want to be able to find what you said before, or find the answer to something. And it's basically structured around that as an approach. So, I think of it as, I think email replacement is really good. I think it's a way to get decisions made fast, or to work, or to work to consensus, because it's kind of non-hierarchical in its nature. There's nobody who's particularly privileged in a conversation. Everybody has kind of the same rights in a conversation. There are administrators who can change settings and prevent certain behavior from happening, or delete messages, etc. But they don't have a privilege when you're having the conversation. So in that sense, it matches both, like, let's say, family dynamics, or many families dynamics, or non-hierarchical groups, like a bunch of parents organizing something, a social group. There could be all these social dancers who go to events together, or they organize a dance, and there's 50 people, and they all have different needs to communicate together. But there may be somebody in charge of things, but no one's like the boss. Inside a company, I think even some companies this won't apply to, because they don't want people having a lot of unstructured conversation, right? So Slack is really for more modern companies, especially ones where there are a lot of remote workers. This gives everybody the same position in a conversation by giving them access to the same discussion, so they're not left out. They can go back and look at public archives I know some groups, I think this is true in Basecamp as well, because Basecamp has that discussion component and posting component. They say, like, when you start the job here, go to these channels and like scroll back like 2 or 3 weeks and just read, like spend a few days or a few hours or whatever, and just read the discussions we've had. And that'll get you up to speed, and you'll see how we work as a team. And you'll also see a lot of the most recent decisions made, and it will help you feel like you can fit in. It's kind of a acculturation, because it's, I want to say informal, but it doesn't have to be. But I think just the nature of typing messages back and forth is informal by itself.
So we still have two other books to get to, but I do want to find out, how did you approach the Slack? I mean, we've talked now about what it is and what it can be used for, but how do you approach reviewing it? I mean, is it a feature by feature kind of guide, or do you take us as start to finish in getting up and running on Slack?
Yeah, it's really hard because it's got a lot of different things. And what I wound up doing is kind of breaking it down. I do, and a lot of times when I write about, a software product or a software environment like this, we focus on like big topic areas, like how to do a thing. In this case, there's a lot you have to learn about Slack, and I think it's a high learning curve initially for certain kinds of things. So I kind of start by breaking down like where you find everything, which is sometimes mystifying. And depending on whether, I mean, they have native apps for iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac OS, and they have a very full functioned web app, which is now limited to the desktop. They basically bar you from using their web app and mobile devices now, which is interesting. I think they've really focused on the native support there. But because they have all these different apps that have to adapt in different ways, the desktop and web apps are all very similar. The Android and iOS app have a lot of peculiarities. So if I'm using an Android app and you're using Mac OS, like, you're not finding stuff necessarily in exactly the same place. So I kind of do this orientation approach and then break it down into these big topics, like how do we have a conversation, like, what's a channel, talk about like using private messaging because it's complicated. I have a whole section, in fact, on privacy as well, because Slack has I think it's a great question to ask if you're working in a company or for some kind of organization that it's not your organization, or it's a formal nonprofit or something. How does my data get used? Like, can Slack just read my messages? Will it give it to the government if the government just asks nicely without a subpoena? Can the person who created the Slack workspace, can they just go in and read all the private messages in the group? And the answer is no. There's a lot of limitations on what even someone who sets up or the owner of a business can do with private messages that aren't in public channels. So I've had to break it out that way, more by, like, I think section of the program or section of the system than I normally would. But then it's easy to go in and offer like a million tips and advice on how to use it, how to be effective. And I think I wrote the first kind of a different version of this book 3 years ago. This is really an overhaul. So it's updated, but it's also retargeted at people who are trying to understand Slack or just about to get into it, as opposed to people who have never heard of it before. Partly because I don't think I need to convince people. Like, I think at this point, you don't have to convince somebody whether Slack is something they have to use. A lot of people have to use it. A lot of people are deciding between, should I use Slack? Should I use Discord? Should I use a Microsoft product? And a lot of the time, Slack is the answer because the free tier is so robust. You can do so much without paying, and they still respect your privacy. They don't sell you as a service to other people. So that's the way the book is kind of retargeted, is like how to do things in all these different areas, as opposed to an overarching, like, okay, here's how to talk to other people. Here's how to create channels. Here's how to use the AV features. It's got screen sharing if you're in a paid version. It's got one-on-one video and audio chat for everybody. It's just got it's funny how extensive some of these areas are, but they've improved the software a lot in 3 years. So it was kind of nice to go back and dig in and find out how many things that I thought were really rough edges have been sanded down.
Well, and I wanted to bring that up too, that this is a different version of the book. It's not, I don't think you're marking it as second edition. This is a whole new thing. Is that?
Yeah, we felt like we're teaching people more about why a community was useful in the first kind of go round on this book, and this one we're assuming, because that was called Slack Basics, and this is just Slack, and it's partly philosophical. Is that I think as Slack has gotten out to more people, I think the company says as of last year, there are like 8 million daily active users, like not all registered, but daily active users of Slack, and 3 million are in paid teams. And so there's, some tens of millions of people who registered in Slack account for some workspace at one point or another. So there's a lot of people out there, and I think a lot of them don't feel like they know how to use the software best. I mean, I'll ask somebody like, oh, you can edit your message. And they're like, what do you mean? It's like, press the up arrow and you can edit your last message. It automatically pops up and they're like, oh, I had no idea I could edit messages. And it's like, oh, well, you have to hover over the message and click the three dots, and then you can click edit message. Or if you go through this, like, oh, and so you can open up all of this potential for people. Some people don't know how to create a channel. Some people don't know how to search the archives effectively for their workspace. Just a lot, or even integrating Slack's one of their big accomplishments is they're a platform. Everybody wants to be a platform these days. Slack is a platform. And so there's a lot of features that they don't have and they seem to have no interest in, but there are, I think it's thousands of apps now are either standalone that work inside of Slack or integrate with something like Asana or Jira or Trello, all these task management systems, and Google Docs and Dropbox and Box. And so you can be using Slack as a control panel for other systems, kind of a conduit. And it's not everyone knows that you can add these apps or how to do it. So there's a lot of, I want to say, secrets that are not buried very deeply, but I don't feel like Slack as an app or a system rewards you in exploration. And that's what the book is about. It's like, it is teaching you how to explore and use the features that, even if you've been using Slack for a month, 6 months, a couple years, I'll tell you this, I'm not going to embarrass Joe Kissel, but he's doing a tech edit of the book, and he came to a major feature, which is posts. These are Google Doc-ish multi-user collaborative documents you can create entirely inside Slack with markdown style for like limited formatting, and you can use markdownish code in it. And Joe writes in a comment, oh my God, I didn't know this even existed. And I'm like, Joe's been using Slack for as long as I have, like 3-4 years, and it just doesn't expose itself, even though, you can click a plus sign and one of the things says post, but if you don't know what it is, you don't use it. So this is a book that is essentially, I would say, the missing discovery in Slack that lets you, in a lot of apps that are less complicated or different, exploring rewards you. I would say Slack doesn't reward you as much, and this book is the reward.
I love that. I love that. And this goes off into a whole other discussion that we've had here and we'll have again, is that balance between sophistication of software and simplicity of use of software.
Yeah.
That there are times that you just can't, I'm sorry, if you're going to build in 40 features and they're all useful, but if you put them all across the top in a menu bar or whatever, that's just going to get cluttered. So I love the fact that you're couching the book this way.
And Slack is part of that Electron School of App Development. It's like, or the embedded web app thing. So when you're using a Mac OS Slack app, it's really not very Mac OS-y. All the menus have almost no features in them. Everything is within this. Essentially, it's basically a website captured inside a browser window or inside an app window. So it can take advantage of native features like notifications and so forth. And it's compiled natively, but it's barely a native app in the sense that we would think of a Mac native app. So you don't have menus to go to, and there's help, but their online help, I would say, is we used to have a take control of Slack admin. I wrote that 3 years ago. Also, we decided not to update that because Slack has actually improved. I would say it's documents for people trying to set up a Slack workspace and administer it. Those are really good now. Like, they've really obviously focused deeply in on that because that's kind of who they're marketing to. The Slack administrator is more important. Somebody who's running a company or a group or whatever, who has to install and configure and manage the group, they need the most help. Users are kind of the customer of that administrator. So it's not that Slack ignores users, but I feel like their documents are much more like, oh, to create a channel, click, 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 as opposed to, why do I want to create a channel? How do I find them? What are the nuances? How do I create on each platform? It's their help is more very like, ticked off specific items as opposed to more conceptual or like deeper explorations for end users. But yeah, I think that discoverability, I've been talking about this for my entire writing career, I think is the best apps reward you because you work with them and stuff unfolds itself to you. And Apple used to be better at that. It is worse. And I fear it's like these new generations of apps are not as good at rewarding you for messing around.
Yeah, but I also think there's an attention span issue there that, may be part of the issue as well.
It's true. It's also after you've used, Chuck, you and I have used like 1,000 apps or maybe 5,000 apps, and you sort of get tired of learning a new one too. You're just like, I just want to dive in and use it. I don't want to have to.
Yeah, and I want to do what I want to do. I mean, that's the thing. What you want to do is great, and all these features are great, but I know exactly what I want to do. I'm facing this situation with a project I have at the office, and I know what I want to do, but now I've got to go and learn exactly how to do it instead of having it be obvious.
Oh my gosh,
it makes you crazy.
That's the future.
So watch this. This is a really smooth segue. So speaking of something that should be obvious, but isn't, Take Control of Your Apple ID seems like a book that should never have had to be written, and yet it's probably one of the most important books for everyone that'll watch the show and listen to the show, because they all have an Apple ID, and you really need to know what's going on with your Apple ID to make sure that you don't end up wasting money, losing purchases, having all kind of issues. Where did the idea behind this book come from?
Well, it's actually, I want to say it's a great idea for a book because I didn't come up with the idea, so I can praise the idea for the book. But Joe put out, and this is true with previous owners, Adam and Tanya, he put out a survey, which happens regularly with Take Control readers about like, look, what can we do for you? What's missing? What would you like us to write about? What's interesting? We're trying to figure out, every few months, it feels like the direction of technology changes, and the Take Control readership, the readers learn more. And so they don't need, we don't need to do a topic about, we're not going to do, Intro to Mac Basics too. It's like, now, everybody in our audience, that stuff. So the top response in this survey to what do you want us to write about was Apple ID. And Joe said, great. Glenn, do you want to write a book about Apple ID? And I said, yes. And we outlined it really fast because he and I have enormous experience with all the frustration of it. And my immediate reaction too was like, let's call this Take Control of Troubleshooting Your Apple ID. And Joe said, that's too negative. I said, I know, but most of the books can do that. He's like, yeah, but we're not going to call it that. But it's true. So I've been writing the Mac 911 column for Macworld I've actually lost track. I think I'm going into my 4th year for them now, since Chris Breen left Macworld. And I feel like it's a sizable percentage. Maybe it's in the 10 to 20% range of the thousands of emails that come in each year are, how can I do X with my Apple ID, or why can't I do X with my Apple ID? So I'm like, so 2 things. One is I have a very deep well of knowing what people ask about repeatedly. And 2, I have a very good sense of what Apple has restricted with Apple ID, because I've tried to find answers for people. And sometimes I've even, emailed Apple's press support saying, hey, someone's having a problem with this. Is this a bug, a feature, something that's coming? And sometimes Apple will help them, or sometimes I get no answer, and sometimes I get a no, this is a, 2-factor authentication set up specifically to do whatever. So, and Joe also, because he's been writing Mac books for so long, Apple books for so long, he's gotten an enormous amount of email about Apple IDs also. So between the two of us, we squeezed a lot of common scenarios that we encounter into that. So it's not all negative. There's some good chunks like using 2-factor authentication that are informative and let you know the choices you're making and how to do it and have backup solutions. Some of them are like recovery strategies. Like if you're doing this with your account, here's how you make sure that you can recover your account later. It's a huge question I get all the time. Someone's like, I no longer have access to this email. This other company went bankrupt. I changed my phone number. I'm in a different country. Can I regain access to my Apple ID? It's like, probably not, but contact Apple, because they might, you send like a photocopy of your passport and an old credit card bill, or so that's, somewhere between trouble, like that's the troubleshooting side, but the preventative side for people who really want to know how to make sure they don't get into a situation in which they can no longer access their Apple ID. We made sure to put in a lot of information about that because there are a lot of steps you could take to prepare for that.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, and I don't think I would not take any of that as a negative in the book.
Oh, that's good.
Just here are the answers. These are legitimate questions, and they're legitimate answers. And sometimes you may not like the answers,
Yeah.
and sometimes you may not understand the logic or not even agree with the logic of what Apple's doing. But there is a logic to it, or there are reasons for it. Perhaps is an even better way to say it. And you need to be informed about it so that you can prepare so that if you do have a work email address associated with your Apple ID,
Yeah.
get in there and change it.
Yeah, change that now.
For heaven's sakes, buy your own domain and get your own, domain so that your email can never be taken from you. But
there's a good one I discovered, Chuck, that it's documented by Apple, but it's super confusing. And I finally was trying to answer a question for someone recently, and I found this support document. So it's not like they're hiding it. It's not like it's a bug, but there's a sequence of things like, so your Apple ID, at one point it could just be a word, right? It could be an account name. And then they transitioned so that everything has to be an email address. And there's still some legacy issues we write about there, but that's mostly gone. But here's the deal. If you use your own email address, there's this whole like cascading set of things. If you change it, so if it's an iCloud address, so if it's at me.com, at mac.com, or at iCloud.com, you can never change that Apple ID email address, your primary account name, to anything but another Apple-owned address. If you have a non-Apple address, so I'm using glenn@glennf.com, and I change it to another non-Apple address, I could change it again in the future. But if I change it from glenn@glennf.com to, bobjonesmith@me.com, I can never change it back to a non-Apple address. And I was like, wait, okay, hold on. And so I kind of had to do this almost decision tree thing. I'm like, and it makes sense, but essentially it's like once you snap into the Apple world, that's it. That account name is fixed and it's always going to have to be an Apple address. But I don't think most people know that. I didn't know that, and I've been using the Apple, idea for years and years and years. So
I did not know that. That's interesting.
And it gets people because they're like, oh, I want to change my address, or my wife and I, my boyfriend and I, whatever, we share an address and we want to change it to our own personal email or separate it out. Like, well, you can't. It's going to be, you have to create another iCloud address from scratch. And I don't think this is even in the book. Someone pointed out to me recently, Apple limits the number of iCloud addresses you can create per device ever. I know that this took me aback. I never even thought about this being a limit. So let's say you create iCloud, it's like chuck1@icloud.com. You create it on your iPhone. Then later you do something, you lose the password, something's messed up with the account. Like, okay, I create Chuck2. Same thing happens. You create Chuck3. At some point, Apple will no longer let you create another iCloud address or Apple ID account on each device you own, and it's tracked by the device ID. And I didn't even know this was a thing. I have to update the book to mention it. It's unlikely it would come up, but somebody had a series of problems, and they just kept abandoning accounts. It was weird. And it is documented, and it does give you an error. It'll say, this device can no longer create new iCloud accounts.
But if I understand what you're saying correctly, then I can move over to my iMac and create another account that is an iCloud account that could be accessed from my phone.
Maybe this person tried that too, and then they tried to use that other account with their phone. They were told a different error message that said they'd used too many different. So there is something, I don't know if I still need to research it more, but so there's stuff like that lurking. I know Apple ID is a very old part. It's like the old abandoned basement at Apple is still running some web object servers, and there's odd things. I mean, the two most frequent questions I get are, I have, me and X, my partner, spouse, child, we share an account and we need to split it into two. How can I do that and split up purchases and other information? And the flip side is there's two of us and we want to merge and use one account, or I have two or more Apple IDs and I want to merge them. And the answer is you can't do either. But over the years, I've developed a bunch of techniques where you can simulate it. So purchases still remain an issue. If you want to merge purchases, you can't. If you want to split purchases, you can't. But there are some ways to work around that a little bit. But for everything else, I have this lengthy section about how you can synchronize your stuff across. If you want to split an account, you create 2 accounts, synchronize stuff across, then desync. It's a whole mess. You wish that Apple would give you the tools to do it, but and that's why, I mean, again, I think I spend like 4 pages on one of those topics in the book, but it's a sort of thing that comes up so often. It's sort of disappointing that Apple doesn't have a tool or advice, and this book is kind of filling in that tool or advice for things where the Apple ID system is very fragile or brittle.
Well, and I would think with the one other question you would get, and you already sort of answered it, but I've got an iTunes ID, which may or may not be considered an Apple ID, and I've got an iCloud ID, which may or may not be considered an Apple ID, depending on how you look at it. And I want to put the two together. And as far as I know, you can't.
Yeah, but what the nice part is, Apple used to initially, I think they were very bad about letting you support those 2 accounts, despite the fact that you and I and a lot of other people have them, because I think we had the same thing. I used a non-Apple account to set up my first, what was it? I think and with iTunes, I used my own personal address to set up an iTunes store account instead of using, because I don't know if you could even use your Apple ID, your like me.com address at the time. So I know tons of people like us in that situation. The fortunate thing is that each iteration of macOS and iOS has gotten better about, I mean, now it's really explicit. Like, here's your iTunes account. You can set that your iTunes and Mac and other stores account can be one account. And here's your iCloud, which is for everything else. Joe taught me this cool thing that's in the book, which is that you can actually have multiple. So you register like an iCloud or an Apple ID, that's your iCloud account. You do a second one that's for iTunes stores. Then you can do on a Mac, you can do like third and fourth like backup accounts that only wind up syncing contacts and calendar entries. So if you're working, so you could share one with a spouse or family member or whatever, but you have to register it in a very specific order into the system, and then it will only sync those entries. If you don't do it in the right order, it winds up messing everything up. So we have a whole thing in the book. It's in his iCloud book as well, about the sequence you need to do if you want to share an iCloud account just for like common contacts and calendars with somebody else.
Only you and Joe would try to do something like that, because that just would scare the daylights out of me, that you're jury rigging it based on the way it is now, and Apple may change it on you in the future.
It's true. It's really supported this way. Joe proved to me it's supported. It's not just an accident, but you have to do a sequence, and Apple doesn't document the sequence. It's like, push the 2 nuclear buttons and turn the keys at the same time. But there's one other thing I want to mention very briefly. Is this is something Joe brought up for me too, and I've gotten a bunch of email about, and we wound up documenting it pretty heavily. Is it's a situation, and this happens more, say, in Europe and some other countries than the U.S., but even I know people who are U.S. Canadian, like they travel back and forth a lot. They even have houses in both places. It's how do you deal with an Apple ID when you live or work in 2 different countries, or maybe spend 6 months of the year in one or 6 in another? It is surprisingly complicated. Or you move permanently from one country to another, like permanently, you're expecting to spend the rest of your life there, or the next like 2 to 5 or 10 years. That is a very complicated situation. So we've got a whole section on like if you're migratory or if you've moved. You remember that situation that came up where the guy was in Canada and he thought Apple had deleted all his movies? And it turned out he was communicated with poorly, but what it was is that there was something about how he changed registration, and it deleted his films instead of letting him access them in the country he was in. So Apple made it right in the end. There's a way to avoid the problem he had, and we document that in the book. But it's weirdly common based on the number of emails I and Joe have gotten about it.
Like I said, it seems like it should be such an obvious thing, and it really isn't, because of the level of sophistication that Apple has introduced with all the services and all the ways to access those services. So
I put a list in somewhere. It was like at the beginning, it's like, what do you use an Apple ID for? And we wound up, I listed like 15 things off, and Joe's like, oh, you left out. And then we had to add like 10 more, it's like 25 things that an Apple ID is used for, if you include things like iTunes Connect for podcasters, if you include developer accounts, if you include the Apple Bookstore, if you do any of those things, plus calendars and email and blah blah. It's an endless list, and they're increasingly shoehorning a lot of stuff into a very brittle system. And I hope that someday we'll wake up and they'll say, "I would love to have a WWDC keynote say, and we know this has been a sticking point for developers and users alike, and we are coming out with Apple ID 2, this fall, and it will consolidate everything and let you have blah, blah, blah. We'll be able to merge and split account. It'll be great. I mean, someday you can wish, but companies typically don't spend money on stuff that does not have a revenue ticket on the bottom line, and that, unfortunately, is one of them. Apple ID works just well enough that Apple avoids it.
Yeah, but that's an interesting idea that a lot of us would probably pay X number of dollars to resolve some of those issues.
Oh my gosh!
And just and I don't mean a trivial amount of money. I mean a non-trivial amount of money to say, I don't want to have some of these potential problems.
Right.
So here's $100 I will spend to have 20 minutes of somebody's time to watch over this and consolidate it for me. And I mean, I'm sure it would be controversial, and there are a lot of people that would scream bloody murder. But I understand Apple's point of view, and I also understand the user's point of view.
Well, you make a great point. It's like, what if in like a putative new Apple ID system that was wonderful and beautiful from scratch, they said, we'll migrate everybody for now, but like, what if I want to migrate all my purchases? Maybe they'd let me do that once a year, or I have to justify it, and it costs $25. It's like transferring frequent flyer miles from one account to another. So it would be, I have purchases on 3 different accounts. I want to consolidate them at one. I would totally it would make me maybe a little mad at one level, but another, I'd be like, I made these choices. It's Apple's technical system. I have to pay $25 and they will consolidate all of my purchases and I lose nothing, but they have to go through all this licensing, whatever. And it's a little like iTunes Match. I still pay for iTunes Match because even though it's $25 a year, it provides just the right level of flexibility and support I need for my music needs. And I don't want to have an Apple Music account. That doesn't fit me. So I can see there has to be a little revenue attached to it to make it happen. So this book is the stopgap. It'll tell you, it'll also pat your hand and say, there. It's not just you, it's Apple. That's why you can't do it.
Well, and that's it. And I know probably I'll have viewers and listeners disagree with that, but it's time that we get over some of this stuff. That you've been using this stuff for years. I mean, I think I know where I if it was possible to recreate it, I could walk right back to where on the Macworld show floor I signed up for my first .Mac account. I remember like yesterday. And how many years ago has that been? And so, yeah, if you want to upgrade or move into the future, then maybe there's a cost associated with it because I want Apple to maintain this stuff.
I have to thank Jeff Duncan. I always do, because when what was it? Was it .Mac, the first one that was announced where you get accounts, a bunch of Tidbits people, we were all at Macworld. Jeff Duncan was in Seattle. He was it streaming or he was reading blogs? I don't know. He immediately went and registered accounts for all of us, our short usernames, and we didn't have time. So we got nice short usernames like Adam Engst and mine and Jeff Carlson because Jeff Duncan did it for us. So I still have that name because of him. It's great.
There you go.
20, or was it 18 years ago or something, or 20 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, I don't even. I literally have no idea. I've
lost the mist.
Well, the third book, because I think we've gotten through a lot, and I really hope people will go and take a look at that Apple ID book because it will solve some problems, might even save you some issues if you're thinking about doing any gymnastics with your IDs. But the third one really intrigues me, Glenn, because this has been out for a while, but it's Take Control of Wi-Fi Networking and Security. There was a time that you bought a router, you plugged it in, wireless or wired, and especially the wireless, and that was kind of it, and you didn't really have a lot of choices, and you definitely did not have a lot of maintenance. And that seems to have completely gone out the window. Now we have to be paying attention to a whole lot of different things. Do you go with mesh or do you not go with mesh? What kind of encryption do you have? There's so many different things here. Where does your book attack some of this particular subject?
Well, and also the airport, when Apple discontinued the airport, or finally admitted they were discontinuing the airport, the previous editions of this book, I've been writing this book in some form since 2004. I think it's gone through. This is the sixth major edition of this book. That's how long. And it is. I've received many, many thousands of emails from people over the years. Also, but we hadn't updated it, I think, in 2 or 3 years because it was unclear what the next step was. The book was really focused on airport base stations, and we were concerned, we don't want to write more about that. Should we just update it so it's updated for High Sierra, Mojave, whatever? It didn't feel like it was a big enough win for readers. But when Apple finally said, we're really, okay, airports cancel, we're not going to be making Wi-Fi base stations anymore, we thought, well, this is the time. We'll abandon most of the very specific how-to. We'll keep the old book available. If you buy the new book, there's a download link so you can get the previous edition if you still have airport gear, and it's all still totally applicable. But the idea here was, let's rethink this because people who are Mac users or Windows users are going to be using, and sometimes have maybe even no desktop computers in the house, only tablets and smartphones and gaming devices and set-top boxes and Rokus and things like that. Like, how do we think about this from a network perspective? So kind of went back and rethought it about, like, here's how networks work. Here's how to set it up. The difference between private addresses on your network and having public addresses. And then on the routing side, we said, instead of saying, buy this equipment, whatever, we said there's kind of two big approaches. There's the traditional router approach, which Apple had fostered, but there's TP-Link is a great company out there, Netgear, and a bunch of other companies make these sort of traditional routers where you have to do a lot of configuration, and there's a kind of gue, typically web-based administrative front end, but you can get ones now very inexpensively that have super high power, 802.11 AC, the latest Wave 2 bells and whistles. And for some people, you buy one of those, you figure out how to configure it, you stick it in the middle of your house, and it covers your entire house, and you're all set, or your apartment, your shed, whatever. And then we said, okay, but if that's not the thing you want to do, if you want something that has, thorough coverage and you're willing to spend more money, that's really the trade-off. There's a bunch of mesh systems today, so we kind of looked through several different mesh systems and went into a little depth on a couple of them about what the limitations and advantages were. Because, what it boils down to, I keep thinking, I did some writing about this for Macworld too. Actually, the revision of the book, I think, came out of my writing an article for Macworld about what do you do if you need to get a new device and your airport dies, or you're ready to give up on airport base stations and you want to move on. And it was, the answer isn't always mesh, because a mesh system of the right size is 400. I mean, it doesn't make sense to get one mesh node, because mesh nodes talk to each other and they figure out kind of the optimal signal strength and relationship to each other, right? So even 2 mesh nodes could be useful, but it's not perfect. So you kind of start having a real utility when you get to 3. But 3 mesh nodes are typically like $400 to $600. So that's a lot of money. You can buy one super amazing, high-powered, central, old-style base station for like $100 to $150. And there are some more expensive ones that have extra bells and whistles that most people don't need. But like the money trade-off. So the question is, which is it worth to you? Do I want to buy a bunch of Eero mesh nodes and drop some cash, but know that I almost never have to touch them again? Like, plug them in and I walk away forever? And they self-update, they download software updates, they self-configure. You have a bad area in your house, you just get one and plug it into another outlet somewhere and you're done. Like, do you have the money for that? Is that your speed? Or do you need to check updates and make sure there's no like horrible internet-based flaw that will affect your router, and you just stay up to date and install the firmware, but it's one inexpensive device? I mean, so I think that's where the trade-off wound up being in the book, is in that center point. There's a lot of networking stuff we talk about and security and making sure people are informed about all the risks. But that big one of like money versus sort of attentiveness to your hardware and configuring those, that's the big fulcrum or pivot.
I like that. I like that a lot. Because you're right. You and I as geeks are, we're always going to be looking at all the details and all the features and all the interesting stuff. And I admit there are times that I'm geeking out on certain aspects of my system. At some point I want to walk in and I want it to work. And that's one reason I really do like the Eero, for all the reasons you just cited. Do I really need an Eero? Well, there were some dead spots in my house that, now I don't have any longer because of the mesh. Was it a little more expensive? Yeah, but it solved the problem. So, and there's nothing wrong with asking that question. That you might not need all those bells and whistles. That we all get hung up on that. I want the best. Whatever the best is, I want the best. In this case, I'm not sure there is a best.
I think that's exactly it. I mean, I think if you look at the reviews, here's the key thing with mesh, and this gets a little technical, but I'll say it very briefly, which is the distinction is the advantage of mesh is that you uh, don't have to wire every node, right? You don't have to plug it into Ethernet. And some actually let you do it. That's the funny part. Like the first mesh ones were like plug in one into Ethernet and the rest you just stick around. And now you can get ones in which each of them have Ethernet and they use Ethernet as an alternate path too. But the idea with mesh is that you don't have to think about configuring anything to do with them. And usually they have very little configuration. You have to kind of go into an advanced mode if you want to do even certain kinds of network configuration. Very low stress, but the early nodes had bandwidth issues because they were sharing, they were doing signaling between each other on the same channel as they were talking to client devices. As the equipment costs have come down, I mean, some of them have stayed the same price and the equipment's gotten better, which is kind of the Apple thing too. So now you can find mesh nodes with 2 or 3 Wi-Fi radios built in, and 1 or 2 of the radios will be devoted, or so usually one radio will usually be devoted entirely to talking to other mesh nodes. So you get full speed from your client to a mesh node. The mesh nodes talk to each other. You don't have to configure or do anything with that. If you get the ones that have an Ethernet plug and you already have Ethernet in your house or even at certain places, you plug Ethernet in and they will use Ethernet or Wi-Fi to communicate with each other. And it just does it seamlessly, automatically, and whatever. And that's a great selling point. But again, it is, do you want to drop $500 or do you want to spend, 20 hours over the next year kind of messing with your other Wi-Fi equipment? And I think for some people, I mean, time isn't always money. It is depending on how you make your living and where you're putting your time. But I do think that there's definitely that distinct trade-off. Eero is the one that I hear a lot of people talking about who are Mac users. I think it has a more Mac aesthetic, but people certainly like Netgear's Orbi. Linksys has some offerings. There are, I don't know, I think 4 or 5 distinct systems out there that get relatively good reviews. And but I feel like Orbi and Eero, of the names, are the ones that have boiled to the top. And the other question was, I was asking this last year when I wrote the Macworld article, and when I revised this book, is how fast and how far will the prices fall? And I feel like there is a kind of baseline where they aren't falling much below a certain point. There were some deals, eventually maybe it'll be $100 a node instead of more like 120 to 100, 125 to 150 today. So that could come down a bit. So there's not like, some people fear like, well, if I spend $500 today, it's going to be $300 in 3 months. I'm going to feel like a sap. It's like, well, it might be $450 in 3 months and, $400 in a year. So maybe you won't feel quite as bad, especially if you get present utility because, I'm sure you've gone through this as well. I have this in my own house and I'm supposed to be a Wi-Fi guru. I finally got a system set up I like. Wi-Fi not working correctly is one of the most frustrating things. For some reason, it's worse than like your internet goes down, the internet's down. But if you can't get your Wi-Fi, it's like, oh, there's a spot in the kitchen. If I turn this way instead of this way, I lose connection or it starts to get spotty, or I have to reconnect, I have to repair my Bluetooth too, and blah, So there are advantages to not having dead spots that may outweigh the cost involved.
Amen. Amen. I know I've been in that situation because at some point it's just like, okay, I'm wasting too much time trying to get this to work, trying to take one antenna on one router and aim it, change it a quarter of an inch to see if that will do it. It's like, no, just let's $20, $30, $50, sometimes $100. Fine. Let's just get it done so we can get back to doing what we want.
Well, and some of us we spent hundreds of dollars in years past. We overspent for equipment. It's like now it's many years old, and there's a lot of people out there who are like, I just need something new. I want an 802.11 AC router. I want the latest thing so I can have the highest speed because I'm streaming video across my house. What do I get? and there's plenty of stuff out there now. And so if you're more technical and more willing to deal with the hassle, you can get a very inexpensive, very powerful router. If you're less technical or less willing to deal with the hassle, you can get some very good equipment that's no hassle. Or it's the equipment you set up, in your parents' house or your children's house, depending on how technical they are, where you don't want to be the tech support for it and go in or, all right, my router started to act up and you find out it's a zombie spreading porn in Brazil or something. It's like, no. the mesh stuff is a little bit better than that.
Well, and a couple things. I mean, first of all, if you go and search best Wi-Fi router in Google, you'll probably come up with 10 articles, and they will name 10 different systems as the top system, which, to my way of thinking, is a good thing because that means that there are that many really good systems out there. But the other point that you kind of passed over there is that we're asking our wireless networks, to do things that they were not built for when we bought that last router 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And, at that point, checking email was great. Web surfing was great. And then YouTube came along, and then Netflix came along. And then we had 4K streams that we expected to appear instantaneously on our TVs. And, your old network just may not be up for it. So
Yeah.
we do have that tendency with something like this. It almost feels like an appliance that, okay, I bought it once. I really don't need to buy it again. And yet you're asking it to do so much more.
Although the nice thing is the current generation of gear, the 802.11ac, there are in Wave 2, just to add to confusion, AC was the main standard, and the first ones that came out were Wave 1, and most people didn't realize that. Wave 2 routers are out now, and they're even more sophisticated, and there's a new standard on the horizon. I'm blanking on the name of it. I think it's AX. Is that it? So funny. I can't remember I
think you're right.
There's so many standards out there, but there's one that is in development that will be like even more so than what it is today is probably the right way to say it, right? It's 802.11ax. It's starting to ship this year. But what the improvements are, and the reason that AC Wave 2 is really good is that was the first version that was really put into equipment that was optimized for mobile devices, in the sense that some homes, an ordinary home could have 20 or 30 devices talking besides computers, right? That's the amazing part, all using Wi-Fi. And some of them are streaming, I say like 4K video. It's compressed, or it's using H.264 or 5, things like that. So it's not taking up, but sometimes you need like 20 megabits per second stream consistently to produce the right kind of throughput to get a crisp, non-pixelated signal. So what AC does, AC Wave 2, I'm sorry, it was in the Wave 1 standard, but AC Wave 2 is mobile devices typically can only stream one kind of stream of Wi-Fi at a time. More sophisticated devices like computers and the routers can do multiple streams at the same time, which kind of basically bounce off walls and get sorted out with multiple antennas. It's a very clever approach. This multiple in, multiple out approach dates back to 802.11n. But the latest standards will actually let different multiple devices transmit simultaneously using different streams, and can also reserve streams. So it can say, all right, I need to push through, I've got 4 streams available. 3 of them are going to be doing this high priority video, and 1 is going to be servicing mobile devices. That's all a little technical, but in essence, it means that even as you add more and more mobile devices to your network doesn't suffer because each of them are trying to demand a slice of the network. They get a tinier piece and still get served, while other higher demand purposes, even on your home network, still have the throughput they need to, again, deliver non-choppy video, let's say.
It's something that needs to be paid a little bit of attention to, especially if you're on a buying spree and you're ready to do some upgrades. And
if this is the time,
and then in a few more years you'll probably need to do another upgrade. But
I actually think, and this is put it in the claim chowder file, as they say, is 802.11ac Wave 2. So the current generation of gear that's primarily on the market will probably last for quite a while. Because it can handle 4K streaming, it can handle all the current video, and you can just throw in, if you're using a mesh environment, you throw in more nodes. So investments today may last a lot longer than they would, say, 5 years ago, definitely than 10 years ago. A network built today in 10 years might actually perform nearly as well, unless you're suddenly, I know 8K video is coming and whatever, but compression is getting better too. Like Apple's adoption of HEVC, high efficiency video coding, I think it's called, is H.2, what is it? H.265 is the underlying standard,
Yeah.
but that can be nearly twice as efficient as the previous standard. So instead of requiring twice as much bandwidth for better quality, you can get the same bandwidth and have twice the quality. So there are people being clever, which I appreciate. You don't have to increase the bandwidth if people are doing better compression.
Glenn, you got to get back here more often. This has this has been way too much fun.
It's great to be on. I always appreciate. I know I can't brain dump on you all the stuff all the time. So next book, I'll be back. There's going to be more. But now I got all these books to revise each year too. We're all up to date.
Well, I don't think any of us will mind that too much. And I did want to point out one other thing, too, that you passed over real quick, and that is that you do write the Mac 911 column for Macworld. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is an essential read with every column because it may apply to you now, it may apply to you later, but you definitely get some information out of it that you tuck away in the back of your brain and maybe even solve a problem you have right now.
My favorite one I wrote recently was, and my editor agreed to pass the headline on it. I can't remember exactly. It was like, what can you do if you Erton keys? It was one of their keys had failed, and so they sent me a message. I couldn't make it out originally, and I'm like, oh, they're typing a message on a device in which the keyboard won't let them type certain letters. They're trying to explain that they can't type certain letters. But I got a few of those, and one of them was someone got locked in, I think, the mouse keys accessibility option, or maybe they got locked into a weird numlock mode on their keyboard, and they're like, I can't type UIOJKLM, period. And I'm like, oh, that's a numlock issue, right? But it shouldn't come up in modern Macs, and it had. But I love those. Right? It's just like, I'm looking at the keyboard, I'm like, what is the common thing? I'm like, numlock, that's it.
Okay, so Take Control Books, of course, is where you go to pick up all of these books. And folks, I would tell you, every one of them is worth it, depending on which one of these topics interested you. And I would hope at least 2 out of 3, and probably 3 out of the 3 have, because they're all really important. Glenn, what else are you up to now? I know Macworld. I know, obviously, these books. What else are you doing currently?
I've been having a lot of fun writing different arrays of features. I wrote a piece for Smithsonian Magazine about how after 20 years of waiting, the public domain opened up again. The law involved is very complicated and uninteresting at some level, but everything first published in the United States in 1923 entered the public domain on January 1st of this year, which includes things like Robert Frost's Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, that famous poem, the first version of 10 Commandments by Cecil B. DeMille, the black and white version, some Noel Coward plays. Like, a lot of very interesting culture has been locked away behind copyright for 95 years. And every year for the next 54 years, on January 1st, the year 95 years earlier, will open into the public domain as well. And that's going to be exciting because I love copyright. Let me tell you, look, I love copyright. I'm a writer. I appreciate that I can write stuff and I get the initial unique exploitation of that so I can make a living from that. I appreciate it. And sometimes I use Creative Commons rights, so I let people use anything for free, or I give my rights away entirely using Creative Commons licensing. But there's this idea that we have a common cultural heritage, and there is some period of time. The Constitution specifically says limited times. That's been interpreted very expansively. Well, limited times are finally over. And so some of the cultural product that was, it's now 95 years old, that we couldn't examine except with the permission of copyright holders, many of whom could not be found because there's no requirement to register yourself to be found later. So the stuff was locked away. There's like the Harlem Renaissance, a huge amount of work from that period of like fecund exploration of Black identity in America, plays and obscure things that most people don't even care about, but someone couldn't publish a critique of it without fear of being sued for violating someone's copyright. The public domain makes it all possible because it simply erases those rights at that period of time. So it's not like it's 5 years ago or 10. It's like writers and filmmakers and so forth, and their families and their children, grandchildren, probably great grandchildren, have all had the ability to exploit the rights of the work they made. But here, 3 generations later, the work's being exposed. So that was a really fun thing to write, and it was. I'm very excited that it's happened.
Sounds good. Sounds good. We have to go check that out too. Maybe get you back to talk about that from some kind of tech angle. There's got to be a tech angle.
There's some interesting ones. It's interesting. Yeah. The YouTube and sharing culture and mashup culture angle.
Yes, good point. Well, we will see you back here again soon with the next book or the next big topic.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Glenn. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thank you for sticking with us. We've had 3 very diverse topics in this show, and each one of them, I think, is extremely important, depending on what you do and where you are in your tech life or your business life. But by all means, check all of them out. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching.
Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our MacVoices Facebook group and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices magazine, free on Flipboard. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us at patreon.com/MacVoices and join these folks who help keep MacVoices coming to you. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.